All right, so we're getting close to finishing up our composite. Just going to add a few more finishing touches, and then we're going to add the text, the 3D title at the end here. Now, moving on, I'm just actually going to go down here to the bottom of the layers panel, and I want to add something in the cloud area. Now I'm going to go over here and select the, remember we got the two layers for the original cloud we brought in, and we made a duplicate, and we brought in that kind of more fantasy color cloud. I'm actually going to put a new layer in between those two layers, and I use my eyedropper tool and just sample this kind of yellow color in the existing clouds. Now in this blank layer, I'm going to change the blend mode of this layer from normal to soft light on that empty layer. And when I go and add a couple of these gradients, I'm just using the radial gradient again and going foreground to transparent and just add a couple of these in there. It's going to enhance the yellow, overall yellow glow of this sky background, and then punches out a little bit more of the detail in there. So that helps add to a little bit more to that. Now I'm also going to go ahead and select the layer of the arch that they're standing on and create a new blank layer above that. Now using that same gradient, this time I'm going to change the foreground color to white, so it's going from white to transparent, and then add a little bit of gradient down here toward the bottom here. It's just above that arch that they're standing on, but just under the subject layer. Now I'm going to position it right over here on the rock, right here in this front face, and then change the blend mode to overlay. Now what that does is it gives me kind of a light source on that subject there. It almost seems like there's a little hint of artificial light above them, and that just adds something to it. I just thought that added a little bit more, and it showed a little bit more detail in the rock. I liked having that in there, so I'm just going to keep that there. Now, got those two elements in place. What I want to do now is a trick I do in a lot of movie poster images that I do that adds that kind of Hollywood grit, as I call it, to that image. And what you need to do is go to the image menu and go to the adjustments and choose, actually no, we're going to make a duplicate first, sorry. Go to the image menu first and then go to duplicate right here. And we'll go ahead and click OK. It makes a completely duplicate file, and we're going to go ahead and flatten this duplicate document. Go to the layer, go down here and choose flatten, because we cannot run HDR toning on a layered image. So we're going to go to the image menu, go to adjustments, and choose HDR toning. Now, this really is a useful feature to create lots of interesting effects. I'm actually going to, now I noticed something right when it applied that. But as I was saying, HDR toning really kind of gives you this kind of gritty look to your images, and it can really add something. But I have a certain way I go about using it, and that's what we're going to take a look at here. But right away you can see that edge glow that we had on the subject, that blue edge, a little harsh here in this effect. So I'm actually going to go back a couple of steps and actually turn those layers off so we don't see that glow on there. And again, I'm going to go to flatten image, and then we'll go to HDR toning once again. There we go. Okay. So the way I do this is I first go down here to the saturation and bring it all the way to a negative 100%. I'm only concerned with the black and white and gray detail in the image here. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the tone and detail section and boost the detail up just a little bit, not too much, and then bring the exposure down just slightly. And I'm going to bring the gamma up just a little bit so it pushes some of the white areas to more of a gray. And then this is where you just come in and start playing around with the radius and strength sliders here in the edge glow section to get the kind of detail you're looking for. I'm going to turn on smooth edges there so it makes a little bit more, gives a little bit more clarity there. I think that looks pretty good. Something like this. I'm going to bring that detail down a little bit, and you can see it's really bringing out a lot of the detail and adding a little something extra to that. So let's just boost that contrast just a little bit more. This is where you can spend a great deal of time really playing with and tweaking these settings until you get something you like. And I think that looks pretty good there. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I could probably play with that another 10 minutes, but who has that kind of time? All right. So now it's the same image. We didn't change the size. We merely flattened it and ran HDR toning on it. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring it back over to the original file. Now, to make sure that it lines up with all the other existing elements, you need to make sure you hold down that Shift key. So I'm going to hold down Shift, drag and drop over, and it lands right on top. Now I'm going to put this way over here at the very top of the layer stack here, right there, and then give it a color. I'm actually going to give it that kind of warm cast of color there, or something like that. and then change the blend mode to multiply. Now you'll notice it really does punch out, or it kind of unifies things in a way, and really punches up the contrast a little bit. But I am going to lighten it up just a little bit. So let's just take the levels adjustment and lighten the overall image here. Something like that. There we go. So you can see the difference that's making there. It's just making it, it's bringing it together a little bit more, and that HDR toning brings out quite a bit of the detail and such like that. And that looks pretty good. Now, a couple more elements to add before we drop in the text. Now I'm going to go over here into, actually no, I got my image here already, is my eagles. So I had to add a couple of eagles in the image because the original poster actually had some in there. And using the same technique I used earlier to select the subjects on the background, I'm going to just drag around and select the background sky here, since it's pretty plain and simple. And then go to Select Inverse and Refine Edge once again. And I'm just going to use the Refine Radius tool and just paint around the wing. And this will help clean up and tighten up the selection of that subject. So once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and make it into a new layer. And there we go. It's nicely extracted. And then we're just going to bring this on over to that existing document. I'll press Command or Control 0 and we'll scale it and position it in the background here, something like this. And I'm going to put it underneath the layer of that HDR toning, and even try changing the blending mode to something like multiply, or even hard light perhaps. Yeah, hard light looks pretty good because it helps it blend in with the overall color rather than in its normal blend mode like that. So simply changing the blend mode of it will help it blend in the background even more. Now I'm also going to make a duplicate of that eagle layer just by holding down the Option key on Mac, Alt on Windows, and then Option drag it over here. And we'll even change the angle of this bird. Now it still looks like the same exact bird. Now here's a cool trick to get away with using the same bird, but making it look like it's two different birds. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use the Puppet Warp. So go under the Edit menu, go down here and choose Puppet Warp. Now I don't need the mesh right there. Let's just go ahead and do that. So now I'm going to add control points at the ends of the wings, and then a couple right here in the middle to anchor it down, and then we'll just bring the wings down. And now the bird has a different look altogether, even though it's the same exact eagle we see here. Now, if you wanted to push them back in the atmosphere a little bit more by adding a little atmospheric perspective, just drop the opacity a little bit for each one. In fact, the lower the opacity, the more further back it will appear to be. You don't want to do it that much. There we go. So that looks good. Now, let's go ahead and add the final element, which is the text. Actually, no, let's do one more special effect element. You know, this is what happens when you get into these designs, is that you constantly add something, and it just builds and builds and builds, and then becomes something completely becomes a whole new animal. But the last thing I wanted to add was the fire element. So this area down here just turned out to be a happy accident in the sense that it's got this kind of glow underneath. So why not have it to where there's like fire, you know, and perhaps a lava lake underneath them standing on this arch here. So let's take this fire element here, and I'm going to open up the channels palette. And this is the quickest and easiest and cleanest method to extract fire you'll ever see. And it's super simple. In the channels palette, go to here to the red channel. You can see it's largely made up of the red channel. Just Command or Control click directly on that red channel icon. Go back to your layer. Press Command J and extracts the layer from the background. Looks pretty good, but however, it's still picked up a little bit of that residual black background. Remember that feature I showed you earlier? Go to Layer, Matting, Remove Black Matte. Magically disappears, and the fire looks fantastic. Now, let's go ahead and take that element and bring it on over. And let's position it in the layers first underneath, or rather make sure it's in front of that element here. There it is. And we'll bring it down here. Put it in free transform, and I'm going to first disproportionately scale it out. And here's where you can have fun with warp and just kind of move these elements around just so there's a hint of that fire right beneath them. Something to that effect right there. It looks pretty good. All right. All right, so now we are on to the very last part, which is the text. So I've gone and created a, well, as you saw earlier, we did this 3D text that I went and created and added to the element loosely based on the text of the original poster. So let's go ahead and create that in here. I'm going to go ahead and select the top layer once again, grab my text tool, and simply make a text layer, and we'll just type the word Shabang. Exclamation point there. There we go. All right. So now, just going to go ahead and make this a 3D object. I'm actually going to give it kind of a darker fill here. Let's give it a middle gray fill, and then go to the 3D menu and go to New 3D Extrusion from Selected Layer. It's going to go ahead and extract that element, as you can see right there. And actually, probably a good idea to do a save as here. It's a good idea to do it a while back, but let's just go ahead and save again to make sure here. All right, so now I'm just going to kind of squash this. You can actually use this axis widget to distort the shape of the text just by moving your cursor over these objects here. So notice I can squish it this way or anything like that. So what I want to do is actually bring it up and position it right above my subject here, and we'll just kind of angle it a little bit here. Let's turn off the ground plane. I'm not needing that. Nor am I needing the shadow. If you see that annoying shadow that's being cast on the ground plane by default, just go into the environment settings here in the 3D panel right here. It's just under the window menu. Go to choose 3D. Go to environment, and then go down here to the shadow section where it says 60%. Just make that 0, and that shadow will go away. Now back to the text. I'm going to add a texture to this. So I'm going to actually select the Shabang front inflation material, which is the front face of the text here, and then go into the properties panel up here to where it says diffuse, and go ahead and choose new texture. Actually, no, not new texture, but load texture, because I have this texture right here, this kind of gritty rock texture. I'm just going to go ahead and click open, and it applies it to the face of that text. And I'm also going to apply it to the extrusion, which is the sides of the text. Again, load texture. Now in CC, ordinarily you'd have to go and choose load texture again and locate the file, but now in Photoshop CC it remembers any textures you've applied to other meshes, and you can just choose those from right here within the menu. And so I'll just go ahead and click on that and choose that. Now we've got a light on this text facing front, which is fine. It's this default infinite light. But I'm going to go ahead and add a second light, which is a new point light. Now, point light is like a lamp or the sun, where it just shines light in all directions. Now, I'm going to use the 3D tool and just slide it back in space here. You can see there's the wireframe for that light. And I'm just going to slide it up until it's shining light on the bottom side or bottom edge of the text here. As you can see, if I slide it, there's the light appearing right there. Now, I'm going to change the color of the light to something like a blue. So it gives me kind of a blue shine on the bottom of that text there. And I'm going to boost the intensity to about 125 there, something like that. Okay. So now what I want to do is give this kind of a irregular shape a little bit, change the letters up a little bit. So what you can do is go to the 3D menu and go down here and choose Split Extrusion. So what it does is it keeps everything still on one single 3D layer, as you can see right here. However, if I go in here and click on each individual letter, notice I can manipulate each one as a separate object. So I can rotate the S here a little bit, perhaps even scale it, and go in here and just play with the positioning of each one of these letters in this title here. Let's just move this over a little bit. I'm selecting it. Now again, these tools, these 3D tools I'm selecting here in the options bar, manipulate the positioning of the object. These, you can also do the same thing with this axis widget. If I move over this area here, I can rotate the letter I can rotate it on this axis a little bit. And even scale it. You can do all kinds of different things. But if you just like freehand rotating and manipulating the letters, you can just do that using the tools here. And just nudge that up a little bit. And this is where the patience really comes in with 3D, is being able to just work around and play around with each of these. But I had some questions about, somebody wanted to create a 3D text effect and wanted to be able to create it with individual letters, and they was wondering if they would have to create each individual letter as a separate layer. And in this case, as you can see, you don't have to do that. You can merely just split the extrusion, and it will look great. I'm actually going to position that underneath the layer of the HDR toning layer and adjust that. Now, as I can see this, I'm actually going to adjust the lighting here right on the fly. I actually have, remember we have that infinite light on the front face. I am actually going to add a spotlight. And this will maneuver this in place here, and the spotlight is the trickiest of all the lights in 3D, but can give you some really interesting results. So you see we get me a little bit of a spotlight effect going on here like that. And then if I do a render, I'm just going to go to 3D and choose render, and it's going to go ahead and render that text. I can see I need to adjust the positioning of that spotlight. I'll just raise it up a little bit and even widen the scope. If you go over here in the properties panel, you can actually go to the cone setting here in the spotlight and increase that. And I'll bump that to about 60, and that makes that a little bit more illuminated there. There we go. But short of a few other minor finishing touches, that is pretty much it. And as you can see right here, actually I'm going to adjust that lighting a little bit more and boost the intensity up. And I'll just do a little short little render on that. Now let's go ahead and escape out of that, and let's just see. And then there we have our overall poster. Now, of course, I can add a few more finishing effects here, like I said. But that gives you a general idea of how you take a concept like a studio shot of these subjects and then build an environment and then put them in that environment and use these various layer tricks to blend it all together. So hopefully it's something you can play around with, and you can now see how you can add 3D to your composites right here in Photoshop without ever leaving the program to generate a fully realized design composite.